What's up guys, we're going to be speedrunning and ranking some new IEMs today to see whether or not they are gas or are they ass. Starting off with the new Juzear Defiant Gaming Edition, I bought these myself. These are essentially the same as the original Defiants, but just with an extra mic and a USB-C adapter for quote-unquote gaming. Compared to my other three units of the OG Defiants, the low end, the mid-range, and the upper mids on the gaming edition is basically identical to the originals. Like A-Bing these back and forth, the only slight difference is in the treble energy, which is a little bit more boosted on the gaming version, and the difference is more similar to a tuning or unit variance than a new IEM. Which means if you already own the OGs, you do not need to get the gaming version. If you need a mic, just buy it separately. Now, marketing and business aside, this doesn't mean the Defiant is a bad sounding IEM, because like the OGs, I do enjoy them as an all-rounder. You know, it's going for that bassy, slight V-shaped tonality. If you need an all-rounder with good technicalities and you don't care too much for the vocals, because the vocals again are a little bit thin, a little bit hollow and recessed when it comes to the, you know, extension and the lower mids. You know, if you don't care about the vocals, these are pretty good as a fun, dynamic listen at mid volume with no real issues aside from maybe the QC. My take on gaming will always be the same when it comes to IEMs. It is mostly skill and experience. Do not get the gaming version in hopes of becoming, you know, a quote-unquote better gamer. Put in the work, save that money, get a higher refresh rate monitor or a better GPU. Overall, I'm gonna still put the Defiant Gaming in rec if you don't have the OGs, and also under capitalism if you already do, because this is just a reskin. But speaking of reskinning, the new Kiwiears and B Media collab follows a strategy. They claim that this is a modified Kiwiears belly. Now, sound wise, the chorus is a bassy, warm, smooth all-rounder. And before we dive too deep, let me show you guys the channel matching of the chorus. Really good, right? Almost perfect basically. Except that this is not the channel matching of the chorus, because these are two different separate IEMs, the belly and the chorus. As you can tell from the graph, they are identical graph wise, and if it weren't for the addition of the new open back vent on the chorus, they would be the same IEM because they use the same shell and the same shape. Which leads us to the elephant in the room: does the vent make an actual difference? Now, after A-Bing these back and forth on the same 20-second part of the same song, same cable, same tip, same source for literally hours, I can actually conclude that there is a slight tiny difference, mainly in that the vocal and the treble on the chorus feels a little bit more, tiny bit more airy, tiny bit more resolving, probably because of the open back vent design. If you blind test me or anyone, they're not gonna tell, they're gonna fail 10 out of 10 times. Just look at the graph, they're essentially basically the same IEM, but with a slight tweak. That aside, if I had to choose between the chorus and the belly, I would go for the chorus because it is slightly more airier, right? It's a slight improvement over the belly by like a tiny fraction, and the plating does look cooler as well. But if you already have the belly, there is no point in getting in the chorus, just like the Defiant, because they are almost identical as well, which is pretty wild considering that this is more identical than the Defiants. Now, marketing and business aside, do I still recommend the chorus and the belly? Yes, I think both of those are great, you know, bassy all-rounders. They're warm, they're smooth, they're musical and natural. They're also very comfy because of how light and small the shells are. So, you know, very good for long gaming sessions, you know, active usage, working out, running. It's not metal, no condensation issues. For around $30, you know, it's pretty affordable, and it comes with a decent cable as well. So overall, I would still recommend these and the bellies if you don't own one or the other already. However, just like the Defiants, if you already own one or the other, I'm gonna put this in the capitalism and you can skip on, you know, one or the other because they're essentially the same version but slightly tweaked and reskinned. Moving on, we got the KINERA Phoenixcall 2.0 next, and these are very different from the original and the Dark Phoenix. The 2.0 sound profile is a bassy, slight V sound signature. It is more on the fun and dynamic, energetic side. It is a better and more matured version of the originals with improved bass and treble quality overall. For example, the low end texture on the 2.0 is more tactile, rumbly, impactful, resolving. It has one of the best bass around $200, right up there with the original Odysseys and the Lecture Astralis. Because the main issue with the OGs and the Dark Phoenix is that the treble came off a little bit too metallic, you know, sharp, peaky, unnatural, whereas the Phoenixcall 2.0 is much smoother, more natural in the approach while maintaining great dynamics, extension, energy, resolution in that treble. The low end follows a linear bass glide, so everything is natural in the transition from the mid bass to the lower mids. There's no dip, thinness, or hollow feeling when it comes to the timbre and the low end. It's essentially a bassier Odyssey with a slightly more sparkly treble overtone to them. So basically a slightly more V-shaped version of the Odysseys. And because the 2.0 is a fun, energetic and dynamic, very colorful, vibrant sound, the potential issue is that the treble can get a little bit bright, especially with the stock white tips, which is why I'm using the Velvet, the Venus, the whites, the regulars both work. Or you can use the stock black ones to kind of tame down the energy as well. It is tip dependent, so I would play around and tip row a bit, which also means if you want a smoother and more relaxing, laid back listen, less in your face and energetic, these are going to be doing a bit too much. In that case, I would stick with either the Daybreaks or the Elbas, or even the Super Mix 4 and Nova would be a better quote-unquote balanced all-rounder. Again, these are slightly V-shaped and bassier because the treble again can get fatiguing on brighter K-pop and J-pop tracks on these. However, the technical performance has been improved and now sits around the Odysseys, but a little bit more sparklier. The pricing is also correctly priced at around $170. It's not overpriced. The cable, plating, the design is very good on these. But overall, if you're looking for a colorful and vibrant sound that's not overly aggressive, but still has the dynamics and the transients, then the Phoenixcall 2.0 is a very good, fun listen. Top tier bass texture for the price. And I do recommend it, giving them a shot if you like a more energetic approach to your music. Next, we got the Harmonic Empire Zhang Liao and XIAO. I don't have them with me right now, but they are pretty decent IEMs. And starting off with the Zhang Liao, this has a warm, leaning, flat tonality with pretty good scaling. You can think of the Zhang Liao as a tamer, less energetic version of the ZHANG Odysseys, or a better balanced, a full Explorer with better treble air and a cleaner low end. Basically, if you found the Odysseys to be too much in the treble, but you also want a little bit more air and extension from the Explorer, then the Zhang Liao essentially comes in and splits the difference there. When it comes to performance, like the layering, detail, imaging resolution, the Zhang Liao is around the same as the Daybreaks and some other stuff at around $150. The treble extension is smooth, it's balanced, not overly bright or airy, so don't expect crazy amount of micro details or like insane resolution. It's not a value monster, but it's not bad either. It gets the job done, but nothing crazy for around $200. You're mainly getting the Zhang Liao for that mid-bass texture, the slam, the fullness, the weight, the linear glide, and the smoother and tamer vocal gain. If you do find the 2 to 4K just a bit too boosted, I like them for rock, indie bands. The stage is pretty wide, layering is decent, and treble is smooth, drums has a nice hit and impact. Again, it is non-fatiguing, which allows it for better scaling and better immersion. Now, I do wish the vocals were more powerful, had better clarity, more resolution and detail, but then again, you are buying these for that tamer 2 to 4K area. So overall, if you like listening louder, prefer a gradual bass glide into less vocal energy, you don't care too much about like vocal power and presence, then the Zhang Liao would be a good pick at its price and a slight bump over the Explorer while maintaining a similar sound profile and pretty good immersion. It is more of a niche set, so I'll put it in maybe for now, but it's not overpriced, it's not badly tuned or anything. Overall packaging accessories are pretty great. It's just that it's not your typical all-rounder kind of set that you can just blindly recommend to everyone. However, speaking of an all-rounder, the XIAO on the other hand is an all-rounder, but it does have a slight vocal pop, which does add that slight sparkle extension to the female vocals. Now, I prefer the black stock tips as the clear ones can get a bit energetic and shouty with the extra 5 to 6K, but your ears may vary. These are also pretty tip dependent, so I would just play around with that as well. The overall technical performance is around the same or slightly less than the EW300, which is still really good because the EW300 is a value beast and these are slightly like $10 cheaper than the EW300, so it checks out with the pricing. However, the treble on the XIAO is smoother and more natural than the EW300. It doesn't have that hard PZT timbre to them, so if you want like a smoother treble, these would be actually better than the EW300s, although the low end is not going to be as rumbly, bassy, impactful. They're still good and balanced. It still has enough energy to be enjoyable, but it is not a bassy all-rounder kind of listen like the EW300. Basically, if you want a more vocal-centric version of the EW300, the XIAO would be it. Even though it is an all-rounder, it's not boring like Harman, and overall, I would recommend these. I think they are pretty decent for the price. Obviously, try to get them on sale, but even retail, they are a decent rec with the accessory, the packaging. Overall, pretty solid IEM. However, unfortunately, I can't say the same thing for the DUNU Titan X. These are going for a warm leaning, vocal playback that's pretty smooth, but it also literally feels like there's a hole in the vocal region from like 4 to 6K, which makes it not a good vocal performer. What this dip does is that the artist and the mid-range feels incomplete in the final extension part of the vocal. It just feels incomplete. You get the initial extension and power, but then it just falls off and you're missing a lot of the resolution and extension afterwards. It feels like almost hollow in a way, and this is also a worse and more expensive version of the TANGZU 1 or 2 bass with less treble extension, less vocal clarity for double the price. So yeah, I don't know what they're doing. If you want more tuning variety, the CCA player is also a better sounding version of the Titan X, especially with the switches on, better treble extension, stage is more open, airier vocals are actually complete, you get better clarity, and again, it's also half the price with more tuning variety. Like, the only good thing about the X is that the build is pretty good. It's fully metal, very sturdy, good, premium feel. The accessories are good, you get a lot of tips, the cable is decent, but that's not nearly enough to justify the vocal hole that it has and the competition around it that does everything that it's trying to do but better. So if you don't want to waste $40 like me, I would skip these. But speaking of wasting money, lastly, we got the Softears SC6 Live. These have 6 custom BAs, not for 300, not for 500, not for 800. These are $1,100. Yeah, so the price is very high, but how do they sound? Well, they sound natural, they sound full in the vocals, it's heavy in the slam, in the mid bass, it's punchy, it's smooth in the treble, it scales great, and pretty immersive overall. But not for $1,100, absolutely not. These also need scaling and power, or else the treble is gonna sound just like dead, really dark, rolled off, or in other words, if you don't crank these up or put in enough volume, they're gonna sound muted and almost low res at lower volumes. Because the SE6 is basically a darker version of the Volume S that's smoother, scales better, has more focus, emphasis in the slam and heaviness in the mid-bass texture. Or you can think of these as a warmer and bassier version of the KINERA reference that scales just as good, if not a little bit better, and shares a similar smooth tonality. All three of those are around the same level when it comes to technical performance, and they're around the same when it comes to the sound, so it would only make sense that the SE6 is also priced the same as the other three, right? Well, that's where the issue lies, because this is 3 times the price of the Volume S and the reference, and it doesn't have really anything special or an edge that pushes it over like noticeably better than the other two. Like, I guess it does scale better if you want something bassier, but yeah, value-wise, these are not it. Now, Softears did make these and market these for live performance usage for musicians, recording, studio stuff. Again, these are natural sounding, they're full, and no way it has good clarity overall, and again, very smooth and non-fatiguing. But if you are a performer or you need it for studio usage, that's literally what the KINERA reference was made for 3 times less the price of the SC6, with similar performance and better drivers with the Sonian and Noel. So like, it's bad when Softears make the reference look like a very good value. It also doesn't help that the SE6 is built worse and looks worse than the Volume S and the reference. Like, this looks like a cheap $100 IEM. Like, I get it, you need to be lighter with the Risen and the thinner cable. The cable is very good, but overall I can't help but feel like I'm somehow getting scammed by Softears, which is why I don't really recommend these for most audiophiles. This is going to be a huge skip, unless again you really need this for live performance. Like, it is more of a niche set. Even then, I would try out the reference or the Volume S first before getting these, unless I guess you really want that mid-bass, darker leaning sound. Even then, it is again not the best when it comes to value. So yeah, anyhow, I hope this speedrun was helpful. Let me know your thoughts on the new releases. Are you gonna get any, or do you think they are cash grab? Because I get it 100%. They feel very lazy in the release this time around. But yeah, aside from that, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see everyone in the next one.
Special thanks to Mr. Dom Q, Zenu, B. Urak, Walker Standard, User, Skasa, Guava Juice Bane, Polly J, Mr. Gorilla, CT Jax, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, 777ZK, PM The Wizard, Obi, Trouble Well Extended, Matt Herc, TR8, Shembakle, FKSRG, Cousin Fat Fat, Tomat Pat for Shake, Atwell, Addy, Michael, Trackstar, Raphael, Ori, Ryan, Juniper, Effinadim, Chimika, Raj, Javier, Gelwog, Ocean, BC Knight, AK131, Emin Gelato, Unbalance, Vitor, Tuna, JRX, Samuel, John Simon, Archie, Forrest, Ninja Watcher, The Audio, Brendan Fish, Sir Eisen, JPLA, Partly Timed, Blue Nerd, ATGBB, Furito, Geranium, Spinner, Sam Z, Raj, Your Boy Banana, Etune, Suli, Grizzly, Leanne, Scafrog, Jeffrey, Mark M, DR6, CD Giddy, Voltage, The Hyperion, Mega, Francis, RJ, Doc Naruto, It's Mark, and Hedgehog. Thank you guys so much for the support.